Hi, everyone. It's the Plant-Based Business Hour. I'm Elysabeth Alfano. It's great to be with you here today. It's been a while since I've been live, maybe a couple weeks. Usually I do this every week for the last 4.5 years. So I'm moving around. I like to take my studio on the road, and maybe I can show you a picture. Well, here, maybe I'll show you. I've moved to the jungle, so you can see. Oh my gosh, yes. I have indeed moved to the jungle. So I'm finally set up and I've got a studio in place. And so it's great to be here with you again. And as you know, on this show, what we do is I like to highlight new trends in the plant-based sector. That can be actually food systems transformation as a whole. New trends, new thought leaders, new products coming out, the way the business sector as a whole is moving, how capital is flowing, and what kind of collaborations are at hand. So with that in mind, I want to tell you that I was in New York for New York Climate Week, and I sat down at a restaurant, I think it was in Chelsea, called Willow, and I thought, Chunk Foods, I've heard about them, but I've never actually tried this steak. And oh my God, just cutting into it was so reminiscent of meat days that I sort of had to take a step back. And I asked, Are you sure? Are you sure this is not meat? And they said, yes, it wasn't meat. So I thought with that, I would bring on the CEO and founder of Chunk Foods. He joins me here today, live from Tel Aviv, the CEO and founder of Chunk Foods, Amos Golan. Thank you for being with me today.
Thanks for having me, Elizabeth. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I feel like Chunk Foods just landed on the scene almost from nowhere. Now, yes, you are in Israel, which is known for its innovation in food, particularly diversified proteins. You've got the kitchen hub there, and there's a lot going on. The left farms, obviously, in cultivated meat. So a lot going on in Israel, and you specifically Tel Aviv. But I just feel like Chunk Foods came from nowhere. Perhaps you can help people understand your background and what you're doing at Chunk Foods.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to do so. First of all, it's great great to hear that you tried the product, and I'm really happy you enjoyed it. We actually launched in the US less than a year ago, so we did kind of, we haven't been there for too long, but the story really starts in the city, in New York. I lived in New York. I lived in the US from 2016 till 2020. And I started building Chunk from my apartment in Brooklyn. So we are actually a U.S. company with an Israeli daughter company, because I started the company while being there. My background is kind of varied. I studied cooking and then moved on to science, and then worked in R&D for a couple of years in Israel. Decided I wanted to move on to engineering and moved to the US, initially to Boston. I did a second master's at MIT at the Media Lab, and then joined Ferrero, the large confectionery manufacturer in New York, and worked there on some of the strategic challenges the company had around food and ag. So really, I was always curious about food from the kitchen through the science and technology behind food, and then into manufacturing. And then during COVID, and thanks to the explosion of plant-based meats in 2016, I started gaining interest in this really cool space. And one thing led to another. I started working on these first prototypes in my apartment, which led today, 4 years later, to hundreds of restaurants, 45 employees, and one of the largest manufacturing facilities for plant-based meats, specifically whole cuts in the world.
Yes, and I'm actually surprised that you only have 45 employees. I actually thought you would have more. How many restaurants again? For those of you who are watching
Hundreds.
Go ahead.
Yeah, many hundreds of restaurants in the U.S. We took an approach where we said we want to launch first in what we think is the most interesting and largest market for a product like ours. So we launched in the US actually before Israel. We're going to launch in Israel early next year. We're already working on distribution partners and on building the commercial team here. but our focus was specifically food service, and specifically food service within the US, to really start understanding that what we think is a very significant market, and to some extent an untapped market. As we see the trends in plant-based today, some brands are challenging, and we think that we have what it takes to break that, to break out of the crowd and really make it work both in food service and later on in retail.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. For those of you watching on video, you can see how thick the meat is. I'm looking at it. It's like maybe 2 inches high. You can see all the layers of the meat. That's what I'm showing now, and how juicy it is and how the juice is running out of it. We're also looking B12 fortified, iron fortified, high in protein, particularly clean label ingredients, but we're going to get to that in just a second. And you can see how versatile it is. So you can do it as a whole steak, but you can also pan sear it, baste it, grill it, smoke it, stew it. So it has a lot of functionality to it. And truly, it says delicious, as these images show. And you see the fork pushing down on the steak. It does really hold up like that, and it cuts like that. So as I stop sharing the screen and bring it back to us, I want to ask you, there aren't very many competitors really in steak. You have Beyond Meat steak tips and you have Juicy Marbles. I can't really think of another whole cut steak company. Lots of whole cut chicken, but not a lot of whole cut steak. So I think it's easy to differentiate yourself. And Juicy Marbles isn't in the States. So I think, again, by being really the first in the States, I think that makes a big impact. But why plant-based steak? As I understand it, from your background, you could have gone anywhere in food. Why plant-based steak?
So I think, it was very clear that plant-based is here to stay. I mean, we all know that there are some challenges to the space, especially there's a little bit of headwinds in the last couple of years, especially in retail in the US. But it was very clear to me that plant-based is here to stay. It's a space that's going to grow. There's significant market there. And it was quite surprising to me that everybody's focused on the same segment, which makes sense from let's say a business school perspective. It makes sense to focus on one segment, which is ground meat, which accounts for about, depends on what data you're looking at, but let's say 38 or 40% of the beef market. Makes total sense. The problem is that ground meat is also the cheapest product in the meat aisle. And as we've seen in the last couple of years, price is really price and the experience of flavor and texture and so on are the most important things when it comes to a decision to actually buy a product, right, in the supermarket. So it's a huge hurdle, and it was very strange to me that everyone's focusing on ground meat and not focusing on those other 60% of the meat market, of the beef market, which are more fragmented. So you have more types of cuts, but they're essentially 2 to 3 times more expensive. So the hypothesis was very simple. If I can use the same ingredients, more or less the same inputs, to make ground meat or many types of different whole cuts, steaks, roasts, you name it, I'm going to be able to compete with beef a lot faster and get to price parity from day one with whole cuts, which is going to take maybe decades to do with ground meat alternatives. So this was really the reason. I do still eat meat, and I always wanted, and I still want, and I work on reducing my the consumption of animal-derived products, and so does my family and many of my friends. And I just didn't feel like there was a good enough product from a culinary standpoint, as well as from kind of the performance of these products. So the focus was always, also because of my culinary background, was always to create something which will be clean enough, and in terms of the culinary application, will be good enough to serve as something that people want to introduce into their daily diets. So something that would actually become a staple, and not just like a curiosity or a luxury or something that you buy in the supermarket once in a while, like a snack. I wanted this to be an actual food, and for people to perceive it as such. It had to be clean, it had to be cheap enough, and it had to be something that resonates with their preferences. And this is what led us to make beef. Yeah.
So what is the price? I know you only do food service, you're not in grocery stores, but what is the price? How does it compare to the same amount of steak or beef?
So actually, and I kept this for the conversation and not for our email threads, but we actually launched in retail last week,
Oh, you did?
and we are
Well,
yeah.
breaking here,
So we
everybody.
exactly totally. We just announced it a couple of days ago, and we're doing kind of in the test and learn phase on both coasts in with independent supermarkets. But the price point, so it really depends on distribution, right? In food service, but the price point would be anywhere between we're talking about let's say in pounds, anywhere between 18 to 22 pounds depending on distribution for the steak products. And
Sorry, is that a
and
retail price or?
no, that's the food service price, more or less.
That's
So
that's
essentially, it ends up being something that today most restaurant operators can price. Let's say, it depends on the product, but between $20 to $35 per entree.
I see,
With
I
the,
see.
within with and by doing that they can make the same kind of margins that they make on any other dish that they make at the restaurant, and that's true for both steakhouses, as which we are the only plant-based product to serve at steakhouses today, as well as Jewish style delis like Pastrami Queen in New York, where we serve our products, our slab products, and all the way to vegan restaurants like Willow and Coletta and Anixi, all run by City Rules New York.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so basically the same at price. Now, how important were clean ingredients to you? I mean, I just don't think of people saying, I want a steak, and I think of it as the bastion of health, and therefore I'm going for the health properties of steak. Now, maybe you might say that's the differentiator. So if all things are equal, they would just stay with regular steak. So you're trying to make the healthier version, but healthier, is that enough, or do you really have to be clean ingredients? And if so, what are the ingredients, and what's like the saturated fat content, for example?
Yeah. So I think there are different consumption occasions and different and
Mm,
for different people who consume. Maybe I'll start from the beginning. We don't like referring to our products only as steak because we want them to serve as as an ingredient, and that's the reason also we started with food service. We have two types of steak, and we have a slab product, which is essentially just this the biggest piece of plant-based meat that is out in the market that you can cut and shape into whatever you want. So you can, some people cut it into strips, some people smoke it as a 2 pound piece of brisket and then slice it on the meat slicer. And we really want to give people the opportunity to use this in whatever cuisine they enjoy in whatever preparation method. That's kind of how we started. Now the reason is that people have different reasons to consume plant-based products and different occasions during the day. So while someone who's a flexitarian may want to vary their protein intake at lunchtime, and maybe they order the same salad from Sweet Greens, but they don't want to have tofu or chicken breast. They want to now have something else as a protein. For that person, we don't necessarily need a steak. We need an alternative to that chopped up piece of protein that they would get at that specific
sure.
restaurant, and it needs a specific price point. At a steakhouse, it's a different customer, right? Like a person who eats beef, if they go to a steakhouse, they're very likely to eat beef, even if they eat 2 steaks a year. They took
Yeah.
a babysitter, they Uber to the restaurant, they're going to have steak.
Yeah.
We're not addressing them. For a steakhouse, we're actually addressing vegans, vegetarians who accompany
Yes.
another group, right? And the restaurant misses out on this whole group if the decision maker is, it could be the child in the family, it can be
Yeah.
the doctor who is the one in charge of deciding where the whole group of people in a conference goes, right? So we have different solutions for different restaurateurs, different kinds of people and consumers, and many of them care about, first of all, about flavor, and some of them care about price, and many of them also care about the quality of what they put in their body at different occasions. And that's why we went with a very clean ingredient deck. We have 8 ingredients. The key ingredient is fermented soy.
Mm-hmm.
Predominantly, it's a compound ingredient, predominantly made of soy flour. So just the soy flour, deflated soy flour. We do add some protein to that ingredient, so we add soy protein isolate, and in this version of the product, the current version, gluten. We're now working on a gluten-free version. We have coconut oil in the product. You mentioned what's the saturated fat content. So we have about, depending on the product, between 4 and 6% fat, and most of it is saturated fat because it's coconut oil. But that's still about half of the fat content in most plant-based products. So let's say the Impossible or Beyond burgers have about 10, 11%, if I'm not mistaken, of fat.
Mm-hmm.
And other ingredients are natural flavors. I believe in the product page, our product page, you can also see the ingredient list. So in our, we have, as we said, so we have the cultured soy flour, coconut oil, natural flavors, beet for color. There you go.
There you go. Right.
Yes,
Iron, salt.
iron,
Yeah.
salt, and B12. That's it. No binders, no
Yeah.
methylcellulose, no gums, no carrageenan. None of
Yeah.
the ingredients, you mentioned a couple of our competitors, all of them use many of these ingredients that we think are okay, but we think that when one wants to make a product that is meant to become a staple, something that you would consume on a daily basis, you want it to be as simple as possible because you're competing with what many people perceive as a single ingredient product.
Yeah. You bring a great point in that you can miss out on an entire market because one person won't eat steak. And so maybe you've missed an entire conference of 300 people because the director won't eat steak or the daughter won't eat. And so the whole family won't go. But then there's also the environmental group. So more and more, it's based on not having all the information, but more and more I go to conferences and the environmental conferences will serve fish and chicken. That's a conversation for a different day, but they won't serve beef. They're just too embarrassed, basically. They can't serve beef anymore. So I think for the environmentalist, this is also a great option. Is there any inclination of the restaurants to maybe put a carbon footprint next to your product?
Well, we haven't seen that from the independent restaurants that much, but definitely from hospitality and corporate dining angles. Obviously, many of them have signed different pledges or are interested in reducing their carbon footprint. Running a restaurant is very, very challenging, and
Yeah.
many of these operators are, they really are trying to do the best they can on all different fronts, but it's very hard to also have for one or a single or two door operation to also handle things like our carbon footprint. But absolutely, and we've been very intentional about making sure that the product is very scalable, that the product has very limited, it's still manufactured in a factory, but limited footprint. It's practically almost a zero waste process. And oftentimes people compare. The product is a fermented product, not unlike things like bread or maybe what other fermented foods do you know?
Beer and tea and kombucha and kimchi and pickled vegetables.
Exactly. So it's very, very similar to those, and it uses a traditional fermentation technology called solid state fermentation, which is very similar to some of these. Coffee, for example, is solid state fermented to kind of change its flavor profile and remove some bitterness. So very, very similar to that, or how you would leaven bread with yeast. And as a result, the ingredients that we use to make the product that we ferment, all of those ingredients then turn into the product. Unlike some other fermentation technologies where you need media and sugar and so on to grow the organisms, but then you have to do something with all that liquid media. You have to basically reuse it or clean it and then put it in the drain and so on. So the process is very, very clean. And we think that once we get into much larger scale, it'll be also something to showcase to our partners. Look, this is how much carbon you saved by choosing to serve chunk at the conference as let's say a chunk salad as opposed to a beef salad that no one really wants to eat because
Yeah.
and there really is no reason to have that beef during that consumption event.
I'll tell you, I went out to dinner with friends the other night, and I was shocked that 2 people ordered filet mignon. I mean, I've just been to so many environmental conferences and, everyone says, I'm cutting down my red meat. They're still meat eaters, but they're sort of like, oh,
Yeah.
but not beef. And I was just kind of amazed that 2 people ordered filet
At the
mignon.
conference.
Well, yes, because it wasn't at a conference. It was just out to dinner with friends, and friends brought friends, and these friends who don't work in environmentalism at all ordered filet mignon. And it had just been so long since anyone I know has ever ordered a steak in public. I don't know. It was kind of funny. Okay, just a last question before we move on to kind of how chunk fits into the larger sector of plant-based meats. I think it would be great to see about that environmental footprint, and I'd love to know if that happens. What's the reception been so far? Do you feel that you've opened so many doors because you're the only option, or really you've kind of solved the puzzle with whole cut plant-based steak?
So, I mean, the competition is growing. There is one player that's been around longer than us that uses submerged fermentation, but I think it really boils down to us working with chefs, with the people who enjoy and know food and know what people like about food, and making sure that they are happy with the product. And we have a team of sales managers, regional sales managers. Many of them were chefs in the past, and when they come to a chef or to an operator, show them the product, explain the benefits of that product and what that does for them, they get convinced, they try it, and then they see the numbers talk. Okay, we sell today at our restaurants, at steakhouses, which would be, for me, that's the most surprising number. In many of them, we are north of 2% of revenue for the restaurant, and that's, when you think about it, it's crazy. It's a place where people come to eat meat, to eat beef, giant cuts of beef, and then 2% of the revenue for that restaurant, and that's only direct revenue. We're not talking about the people that would have otherwise not gone to the restaurant and now come to the restaurant because their daughter has something to eat or their husband has something to eat at the restaurant.
Yeah.
So
added
and then in vegan restaurants, it's the number one best-selling item probably within days after it's being introduced. And then you have all the institutions in the middle. So I think it's a combination of us working with chefs, creating product that we ourselves want to eat and enjoy eating. And I think it's important. You want to make something that people actually enjoy. And that solves a real problem. There is a problem that needs to be solved, and there aren't a lot of solutions.
No, and that problem's not going away. So it really doesn't matter in the long term that the meat industry has launched a very expensive, very well-funded campaign against the sector. That campaign's been running for about 3 years. It's slowed up in the last 6 months to a year because they were so successful. They don't need to really keep spending the money. But that doesn't change the fact that we have enormous issues and there's no solution. So until we figure it out, this is the best thing on the table, and probably the long-lasting solution. Just a quick question about technique, because it is so many layers. It is about 2 inches high. Is it high pressured to get the layers to stay? Why does it not fall apart?
Yeah, so the fermentation is really key to this process.
I see.
We don't use any high pressure or high temperatures or anything like that. And if you ask me what could be improved about the product, it's actually it holding together even better, right? Because it does give you that it holds very well, but it has a little more of a braised
Yes.
kind of beef perception than an actual steak. And that's something that we would at some point. Some people enjoy a more chewy eating experience. So we would want to be able to deliver that as well. But yeah, it's the fermentation process. The fermentation it's a natural process. Our world has directionality, right? Gravity, things have direction,
Yeah.
and so does fermentation. So it's a natural process, and therefore it has this directionality. And we make these very large cuts that then we can cut into whatever shape and size we want. So we can make it comes as something that looks a little bit like a roast, or like a roast beef, and then we can cut it into different types of steaks, or we can pull it apart into a pulled beef product, or we can cut it into these slabs and make something that looks like a brisket.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's really exciting. We've talked about Israel and, obviously your entrance into the US. And many times on the show, we talk about Europe and Asia, but you are fostering collaborations in Mexico, and I think looking to even go further south to South America. And I'm wondering, and which is brilliant. Obviously, their dependence on steak and that long history of gauchos, which is sort of the Latin American cowboy and the cattle ranching, um, which is an environmental detriment. Obviously, Brazil deforesting the rainforest, for cows specifically, such a bad business equation, such a bad trade there. So what do you see the outcome will be for you for Latin America?
So I think the collaboration with Sigma Alimentos has been, it's one of those things that happen. Wasn't necessarily planned. We met them at a conference. One thing led to another. There was excitement about this collaboration and interest on their part. They're building their own plant-based brand that they have very strong ambitions around. So it was almost serendipitous that it happened. I think that our approach is to choose a couple of markets where we can excel and where we only have a limited amount of money and resources and attention spent. So we're trying to find the markets where we think we can shine and find the best partners in other markets where we think we can, they can benefit from the best-in-class product that no one else has. Potentially, it complements their product. Potentially, it complements their brand or their distribution routes, and work with them so that we can have a much faster growth in those markets. And Mexico is a super interesting, potentially underserved market, which is surprisingly used to paying a little more for plant-based products because a lot of them are imported from the US. Mm-hmm. So if you buy a Beyond Meat burger in Monterrey, it's going to cost probably like $1 or $2 more than across the border, which is very surprising, but there are people there who are willing to pay, especially the early adopters. You have a lot of hospitality, Cancun and so on, and hotels where they need a solution. And there's a lot of kind of back and forth of both Americans and Mexicans between the countries that then obviously helps create some brand recognition across around the two sides of the border. I think there's huge potential all around the world. Like that layer of first, let's say the 3 to 5% of early adopters for the various reasons that you mentioned, environmental reasons and ethical reasons and just dietary restriction reasons and so on. Those exist anywhere. And underserved markets, they have their own challenges, but the benefit is that no one else is fighting for those same people. So we're very happy about that. Happy about that relationship, and we're working on a few other such relationship, collaborations in other territories. And if there's anyone here that's listening and finds this interesting, we would be very open to having more of these conversations in our territories.
I actually have contacts for you. I'll take it offline and we can discuss. I've got some folks maybe to introduce you to. Okay, so that's Mexico and Latin America. Makes super sense to me. But as we look globally, where do you think the sector's going now? Sort of take a bird's eye view. So not just for Chunk Foods, but for the sector as a whole. Where do you think the sector's going in terms of demand for products and also in terms of flowing capital to the sector?
Yeah, I think the space is just becoming more disciplined, and by that I mean that we had brands from all over the world working in plenty of markets that each one of them has its own challenges and intricacies and relationships that need to be built, and you need that's part of the culture in that country or region. So for example, the way you would interact with a Israeli restaurateur or a chain owner, and the people you would need to work through to get to close a deal, they're very different from it's very different from how you would do that in the US, even if it's the same hotel chain, if it's the same Hilton, right? In Miami or whatever, in Tel Aviv. So I think what's happening now is that the everything is kind of cleaning up. In the US, frozen makes more sense in retail. So
Yes.
many of the brands that were working in chilled are either
Right.
moving into frozen or they're closing down. And in Europe, it makes more sense to be in chilled. And there are things that result from that decision, right? So you need supply chains and you need to have a product that can serve people in how people in Europe, or in Europe is also obviously a continent with many different people with different ways of different behaviors. But you need to make sure that where you put your efforts, you understand how people consume, how people purchase, how people buy, what the chain looks like, and it needs to be very deliberate. So I think that the space is actually growing. It's as a whole, things are cleaning up. So it may look like some things are slowing down, or in the case of U.S. chilled, for example, that's really shrinking rather rapidly. But frozen isn't, and food
I know.
service
Yeah.
isn't,
Right.
and Europe chilled is growing again. So the space, I think, is the great companies, and there are a few great companies in the space. They're going to continue growing. They're going to continue being, they're going to be able to raise funds because they're just a good long-term investment. And yeah, and hopefully, some of us will be the next Mondelez or Ferrero or Nestle, right? Like, and be very large multinationals.
Well, so you bring up a great point. I agree with you. It's not that it's shrinking; it's that it's morphing. So what used to be chilled is now frozen, and food service continues to grow. And we're only going to see more of that as the environmental pressures continue and education continues. Um,
And products improve,
and
and
products
products improve, and
improve, right?
operators improve.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and the negative campaign from the meat industry can derail things for a little while, but ultimately we all come back to having to solve the problems. So we might not be this generation of founders. Some will close, but they'll just be that next generation. You're going to have to continue to solve the problem. And so innovators are going to do that. They're going to innovate to solve problems. That's what capitalism does well, actually. So I don't think the space is going anywhere. I think it's just morphing and going through some growing pains. I actually thought I would see more mergers than I've seen. I saw sort of the amount of closing doors that I thought, but I thought I'd see more buying up of this or that and making a larger company by buying up smaller pieces. I haven't seen too much of that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's still to come.
I think it's still to come with the companies that have more sales. I mean, you really need,
Yeah.
in order to merge and to acquire, there needs to be clear value in the in
Yeah,
the
of course.
in the company that's being acquired or merged into another company. And I think many companies didn't have enough sales, real sales, repeatable sales, or just didn't really have any assets.
Yeah.
Many of the companies in our space were brands without manufacturing capabilities. So one of the things that we try to do, and some others in our space also did, is to not only build a brand, but also to make sure that this brand stands on very solid ground, which is we have protectable IP, and we are the only ones at the moment in the world who can actually manufacture these products at scale. So
Yeah.
it really there's actual value. If someone were to buy us, if that would become something that we are interested in at some point. At the moment, it's not. We would actually have assets that are valuable aside from, because building a brand is very expensive and takes a very long time to build a
Yes.
very valuable brand.
Yes. Yes. Well, you said before Mondelez and Nestle. It's not really that you see yourselves being a Mondelez. It's that you see yourself being bought by a Nestle or a JBS. And Nestle is more focused on dairy, so maybe JBS, etc. The Cargill. These maybe not
Well,
Cargill, but JBS.
look, we are now operating as if we are building a company of those scales.
Really?
It could take decades, yes, but we're operating. I worked at Ferrero, and I have immense appreciation for the how that company grew. Essentially, it took more than one generation, but from, let's say, one person or one family to a multinational that makes many billions of dollars a year with tens of factories. And yeah, we operate the business, or I operate the business at the moment, as if this is where we're going. And if the right thing for Chunk and for what we stand for is to be acquired at some point, and the right offer is on the table, then we will consider it. But at the moment, we're trying to build a huge business.
Yeah, that's really very interesting. Well, I think, as you say, I think the good brands are going to continue to get capital. I think to date you've raised 24 million. Is that right? Yes,
Yeah.
about that. But I think the capital is going to come from different places. Talk about it a lot on this show, blended capital. So philanthropic dollars, government R&D, Wall Street capital, and VC capital. It's the VC capital that was running things before. I don't think that will be the case again. I think it will be more this blended capital. And I would add to that, I think where you'll see a real increase in capital is the government spending and for R&D and industry spending. Industry before was spending really sort of small VC arms, just investing here and there just to see what's going on, to get a sense for the space. I now believe they generally have that. They're going to invest bigger for more concrete plays that have a real direction because they now understand the space a little bit better. And so it's a less of spray and pray and more of, okay, we know what to do, and this is the strategy that we're going to follow, and we're going to invest against it. That's what I think. So we'll see. We'll see. Any sense
Yeah.
for industry investment? What kind of industry investment will come through?
You mean in Chunk, or like in
No,
general
in the
space?
sector
Or
as a sector as a whole. Do you see more industry players getting into the sector?
we,
So not plant-based
yeah,
players, but really industry players.
yeah, we're look. I think many of the large food companies who operate in savory either tried or are still trying to do something in our space, either through acquisitions or through just building their own brands. And oftentimes they're not agile enough to
Mm,
work in such a up and coming space. I think that the corporate VCs and some invest in the market in the space. They're a little less sensitive to valuations. They're a little more patient, and the ones that along the value chain, so from raw materials all the way through potentially processing equipment and CPG and distribution and so on. I think those would be smart to invest in our space, especially if they think they can spot the winners, because I think on the long term, there are some companies that are raising or will be raising soon that are a good investment, and if that capital is a little more patient, and it can become part of their existing business model, because sourcing is a challenge for a small company, distribution is a
yeah,
challenge for a small. All of these things, they affect the
yeah,
end price, which is what's driving success or failure in our
of course.
space. So
Absolutely.
this combination of money, a little more patience, and also
Yeah,
helping or working with the company on part of the of the value chain, I think that's the winning strategy, and I hope to see more of these strategics make investments. And I think
I do too.
also family offices. So my view is that family offices, many of them, first of all, should be looking at whatever it was that made the family wealthy is likely to have contributed to the earth carbon footprint oftentimes. But aside from that, I think that again, it's a little more patient money. It has the ability to, many times these people are more interested in manufacturing, in production, in more classical businesses. And at the end of the day, food is a there's really the sky is the limit when it comes to how big a food company can be, because people eat a lot of food, just happen to really enjoy food. If you make food that people enjoy and that is nutritious and is cheap enough, but it takes a little more time than a SaaS company or anything else. So I think family offices, CVCs, and some very unique CPG investors are probably the best fit.
Yeah, I'd like to see and hope that we'll be seeing more, as you say, patient capital coming from industry, because then that money comes with knowledge, and it comes with distribution channels, and it comes with concessionary supply chain buying and all these things that are so beneficial that you don't get when you're a little company. So I've seen more family offices enter the space with food as one of their 3 pillars for impacting climate change, along with transportation and new energy. So I see more of that money, but they don't know what they're doing. They don't understand the space at all. So this is why I like the industry money, because they really can help catapult a brand to scale. I'd like to see more relationships like the one with AB InBev and Evergreen, which I thought was a really good one. Evergreen helping them upcycle spent barley that had previously been used for beer, upcycle that for alternative proteins coming from barley. So you've got food recycling, addressing food waste, as indeed also addressing more protein. So you say we eat a lot of food. Well, indeed, we're going from 8 billion people on the planet to 10 billion people, and we're having Africa, China, India all go into middle class scenarios where they didn't really have a growing middle class before, or any middle class, and now they have one. Of course, they're all demanding meat. So that's a business equation that won't withstand more demand for these inefficient, resource-intensive proteins when you're not getting more land and you're not getting more water. You're just getting more people and more demand. So that's not going to work. So again, I'm hoping for that industry capital, because while it is patient, it can help scale pretty quickly. And so you can see food turn around much faster than, let's say, transportation turnaround. Food could, because the technology, as you say, it's there. You're using an age-old fermentation process that's as old as the hills. Food can grow and scale rather rapidly with the right partners at the table, unlike electrifying the entire grid for electric cars. So it's
and at a more modest expense, right? The capex that's involved in some of these
right.
facilities is actually not very different from building a bakery. Okay, so
yes, yeah. And
what do you think would be the best fit for something like Chunk when you think about industry players? Let's call them out.
Ooh. Oh, let me think on this. Who already ferments meat? Anyone?
Well, one of the reasons we partnered with Sigma is because they're one of the biggest chorizo manufacturers, and chorizo is solid state fermented. So definitely there are, prosciutto is fermented, it's cured, but it's a fermentation process. Parmesan cheese is fermented. It's so many foods that people enjoy that are made of animals are solid state fermented. So
have you ever been in contact with a company called Daniele? They do prosciutto, and their founder, the son of the founder who ran the business for a very long time. Now they sold the business, but I believe they're still in touch, is very interested in plant-based and alternatives. And spent his whole life building meat. He'd like to now build something that's not meat. So I can maybe put you guys in touch as well.
That'll be great. Thank you.
And I'll keep thinking about this. Okay, as we wrap up here, maybe a couple of personal questions. All that you've gone through, your time at Ferraro and MIT and now Chunk, what do you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know now?
Wow, that's a tough question. I don't know. You learn every day. I learn every day. And I feel like we learn very quickly. So, and I think there's a reason why we learn things in the order that we learn those things. I think probably so it was, all of these were good learnings. The mistakes were all important. I wish I'd know that that fundraising is hard.
Painful.
Okay? And that it's painful, and it's okay. Because when you start a company and you're one person and you're having hundreds and hundreds of meetings, and all you have is this lousy deck with like a couple slides, it can get very frustrating. But I think what I learned is that if you believe the story and if you've done your work, you're gonna get funded to fulfill this dream. And
Yeah.
and we're now planning to raise again, and next year. And it's I know it's going to be painful, but at least now I know that how painful it's going to be, and that at the end we're going to raise the money that we need in order
Yeah.
to continue building this dream. So.
And are you getting support from the state of Israel?
No. So it's actually, we have a very unique structure because we have a US mother company. So didn't get any support from the state of Israel. We weren't eligible for support.
Oh.
And so far, we didn't get any support also from the US. So, but we are working to change that.
I bet you are.
And we're working to change that. And part of it is our long term. So we really bet on some of these grants. When you look at them deeper, you see that in a case where you succeed, they can be a hurdle. Because no one's giving money for free. So we really from day one we really bet on our success. We knew that we're gonna grow to become a big company, and that the future of the company is in the US, and also in terms of manufacturing. We're planning to build a very large manufacturing facility in the US, and that's why we chose a specific structure that has some benefits down the road. But it was a little slightly bigger challenge. I'm not afraid of challenges, but it was a little harder when it comes to money, because we couldn't get some of these grants that the state of Israel has for startups like ours. Yeah.
But you'll be entering Europe as well, or you're already in Europe? No, you'll be entering Europe.
We through the partnership with Sigma Alimentos, they will very likely start working in Spain next year. With our co-branded product. And there are a few other relationships that we're now building, and those are a little too early to disclose, but we're working on some other European launches.
That's awesome. Okay, so you're having a busy day and you're running around. Your day's not going the way you would like. What is one phrase you tell yourself to get yourself back in the groove?
Well, work harder. I don't know.
Oh no! Oh, you taskmaster!
Take a quick break and then work harder. No, I mean, I just try not to give up. Take a quick break, spend some time with my son if it's not too late in the day, and or with my wife, and then go back to work. I'm a bit of a workaholic, so
I got that.
Yeah, but so.
Okay, you need yoga, my friend. I'll make some introductions for you, and I'll teach you some yoga. Okay. My very last question for you. It's same day. It's still not going your way, but it's like falling apart so much that you didn't have time for lunch. What is your go-to snack?
Yeah, that's more in my alley, down my alley. So I really love pretzels, kind of the very salty and crispy type. So that's really my guilty pleasure. And here in the office, I have a tendency to eat way too many nuts when I don't bring lunch or I don't have time for lunch. Today was pretty much back to back from 9 a.m. and it's now whatever it is, 6 or 7 p.m. already. So so I had lots of nuts today.
Oh my gosh. Well, I love pretzels, and I don't like peanut butter filled pretzels. I don't know who thought of that, but it's not working for me. So you can just stop that. But I do like pretzels, and I like the old fashioned kind where they're kind of thick and they're a long rod. So not the twisted pretzel, but the long, thick rod makes me long for sort of Germany and beer, actually. But okay, I want to thank you, Amos, for being here, for sharing everything, for bringing Chunk Foods to the U.S. and for making such a splash when the sector just needed some uplifting news. And truly, you have done that. I'm going to share the screen just one more time. I want everyone to see just how delicious this is. And I can tell you, I've been there, I've done it, I've eaten it. And yes, it is all that. So get yourself some Chunk if you can get yourself to independent grocery stores on the coast. If not, and you are in restaurants, ask them for Chunk. Say like, hey, where's my plant-based Chunk steak? So this way, you'll bring people to know about Chunk, and they can request it and chunkfoods.com, everybody. So, if you want to see Chunk in a restaurant near you, be sure to let them know. Amos, I want to thank you. Please don't go away. Everybody else on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn, I will see you all next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.